Even though we obviously haven't gotten everything we want as conservatives on the issue of immigration, I think we can chalk it up as a big win that even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's federal Liberals are having to put in place heavier restrictions on new permanent residents, temporary foreign workers, as well as foreign students. This demonstrates that even they know that mainstream Canadian politics wants tighter immigration restrictions. I think that we need to go all the way down to only 100,000 new permanent residents a year, if not lower, with a very strict point system where, unless you are going to be a net benefit to the economy and society, we just don't need you right now. We don't have the housing for it. And overall, I think it's just been too much all at once, and you can't assimilate people when you're having 500,000 of them come in per year and all basically settling in the same parts of cities, not having to ever interact with other Canadians at all. But this is a big step forward, having Mark Miller and Justin Trudeau with Liberal MP Sukh Dhaliwal standing behind them, who has always been big on mass immigration, announcing that they will be cutting immigration rates down from 500,000 to 395,000 and then further reducing it from there. Still too much, but still, this is a win.
Canada's permanent immigration targets and aligning them to our economic needs. I'm here to announce and confirm that the current plan reduces next year's projections from 500,000 permanent residents to 395,000, a net reduction of 105,000 permanent residents immediately in 2025. After that, in 2026, a progression down to 380 to stabilize the numbers at 365 in 2027. The lower permanent resident targets, as well as the temporary resident targets that I will speak to in some length in the next few minutes, will have and are expected to impact the housing supply gap by about 670,000 units by the end of 2027.
I was just getting up to that point because I wanted to get to the point where Mark Miller basically says what Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party's point was on immigration. Jamil Javani has been doing a great job on this issue. I'm going to be linking his petition E4956, which is calling for heavier restrictions on immigration. When the Conservatives were calling for heavier restrictions on immigration because of housing supply, Mark Miller, 6 months ago or so, basically came out and said that was a xenophobic position. And now he's standing next to Justin Trudeau and flanked by tons of minority Liberal MPs, stumping for these restrictions that he thought was bad, or he was at least trying to portray as bad, even though he probably knew that this is what we needed for better housing affordability in this country. You cannot keep throwing more demand onto a market where there is not enough supply. It's always been the liberal myth that somehow, if there's just a demand issue, give people more money and then they can afford it. But the problem is that there is not enough houses for people to purchase. So it doesn't matter how much everyone has. The problem is people are going to be left without homes. And the entire immigration system has mostly just been subsidizing the Liberals' awful economy, not been making it a better economy, but making it a more bloated economy. We get our GDP going up, which makes Justin Trudeau look good for about 5 seconds until you realize that GDP per capita has been going down. Because obviously, adding more warm bodies to an economy is going to increase the GDP. It doesn't mean that we actually are all better off. It just means more people are here with the money that they make. They might not be making very much because there's not much productive work for everyone to do, but it adds something. That's why India and China have massive economies compared to Canada, even though their per worker productivity is very low compared to us. Anyways, I want to get to another part of this little press conference where Justin Trudeau talked, because I find it just so satisfying that Justin Trudeau actually had to come out and take this a more, not hardline stance, but take the stance that he obviously would have criticized any conservative for taking.
One of the things that has ensured that Canadians have and continue to have confidence in our immigration system is that we have a robust, responsible immigration system that is also flexible.
If flexible, the whole point we're having to do this because you flexed it too far. You had 1.3 million people enter the country in 2023 and like 900,000 or so in 2022. And this year we were about to set another record. And when you saw your polling numbers go whoop, then suddenly, wow, we can be flexible in the other direction of having lower immigration. Because the real reason that Justin Trudeau is doing this, and I said this on Richard Serrett's show on Saga 960, is that they're doing it because they're losing Quebec. That was their last stronghold, the island of Montreal. And they started losing those seats. And so now suddenly they need to embrace heavier restrictions, or the French won't vote for them either. Frankly, Torontonians and every Canadian is actually wanting heavier restrictions on immigration. But that was the final alarm bell that went off for Trudeau to actually back off. And I guarantee he's also doing this to save himself from members of his caucus who are having constituents complain to them all day, every day, that immigration's too high, you idiots. That's why we can't build enough houses to actually reduce the prices.
There have been many times over the past years and decades that Canada has adjusted its approach on immigration.
But the problem is you've only ever adjusted it up over the past 9 years until today.
Just think about the pandemic, for example, where we stopped immigration. We closed our borders for a long stretch.
That's just not true. We had lower immigration, specifically in 2020 and 2021, maybe compared to previous years. But that's like saying 150,000, 200,000 was closing our doors. That was still too high for our housing crisis that we have going on. And obviously, again, the problem is that there is zero checks on anyone entering the country. So we have people from ISIS entering the country. We had Roxham Road just allowing random people to walk across the border into Canada, people who have fake medical licenses, people who don't actually have the credentials they say they have, who can't work more than minimum wage jobs, undercutting just, teenage Canadians, people who need their first job. I hate the stupid talking point. Canadians don't want to work these jobs. That's why we need outside foreign workers. No, the foreign workers and the businesses don't want them for those jobs either. That's why they need wage subsidies. Canadians don't get wage subsidies. You don't get $3.50 of the worker's wage subsidized by the federal government if you hire a domestic Canadian, only if you hire a foreign Canadian who likely cannot do the job as well. But, I think a lot of it is also just the education system has let down our work base. When I was in BC, I was hearing about how much you can get paid for pretty just manual labor type roles on blueberry farms, and it was you could get 23 an hour or so. A lot of young guys in high school would probably do those jobs if they knew about them, but our entire education system is about trying to get people into university so they can get a degree they don't need. Obviously, tons of university degrees are very useful, but I think it's not a stretch to say that we have a few too many sociologists and anthropologists in our society and not enough people who work as electricians, plumbers, construction workers, all that sort of thing. Trades jobs are often so much better than the degreed jobs that you get in university.
In order to keep Canadians safe, to respond to the crisis we were going through at that moment. What that meant was once the pandemic closures were done, we had significant labor shortages. We needed to get our economy rolling again.
Why do we have such high unemployment rate and even a low workforce participation rate if we suddenly have all these jobs that need filling? No. You get business lobbyists who lobby for these temporary foreign workers to come into the country because they're subsidized labor, and they say that Canadians don't want to work these jobs because they don't get to pay Canadians artificially lower the way you do with a temporary foreign worker. And it's basically just modern day slavery, having a bunch of people show up, 15 guys sharing half a basement suite, driving for Uber Eats and working for Tim Hortons. And that's supposed to be the normal labor base for an economy. That's crazy. That's like what Qatar does to people who come in and work construction and whatnot. They take away your passport and you can't leave because they don't let you have enough money to be able to buy a plane ticket.
We listened to business, we listened to colleges and universities, and we boosted the number of people coming into this country. That was a response to the COVID slowdown and shutdowns. But now our economy is in a different place. We've seen massive population growth over the past years, particularly in the area of temporary workers and temporary residents. And we are now saying, okay, we need to let our communities, our infrastructures catch up to the population. And that's why we're pausing population growth by reducing immigration numbers for the next 2 years.
It doesn't pause it if you're still bringing in over 300,000 people. It's crazy. I'd have to explain this to somebody like Prime Minister Trudeau, and he's acting like this is such a novel idea that maybe we need to let our infrastructure catch up with the population by not adding more population onto it. But also, too, the thing is, and goes back to just so many fundamental issues with Canada right now. It goes back to the government being too big. The reason why companies want this really cheap, low-skilled labor is because their taxes are too high. Income taxes, corporate taxes, the carbon tax, everything is such a high cost. They're trying to nickel and dime their way into to stay within profitability, to stay profitable, which you can't blame them, by working with the government's current framework around high immigration and using that to their advantage so that they can be able to actually afford to keep the lights on. Hiring in Canada, hiring domestic employees is a little bit tougher. You can't under the table pay them less. You can't do a lot of other things. You can't get subsidized labor with domestic Canadians. And so these businesses are demanding more foreign workers and these universities because we haven't increased domestic tuition in so many provinces in decades. And when I say we haven't increased it, I mean that it's technically goes up every year, but it lags behind inflation so much that the students today barely pay anything compared to students 20 years ago. And so because of domestic students are so heavily subsidized by taxpayers and they pay so little into education, the only two options we have are either taxpayers directly subsidize the universities more, or you bring in foreign students who can pay double or triple what a domestic student is paying. And so the universities played in the framework the Liberals had created in different provincial governments and started making half of their classes foreign students. And then when we put caps on them, then they started having to make program cuts. I used to be on the General Faculty Council in the Mount Royal University. I can tell you they do need program cuts because they waste a lot of money. But overall, nobody wants to address the idea that we tax taxpayers so much to subsidize universities without having a thought. Maybe the person getting this degree should pay a little bit into it, especially if they're taking something that's probably not going to be beneficial in the future. Maybe someone having to pay $6,000 a year to go into, or $7,000 a year, $8,000 a year to go into anthropology will think to themselves if they're actually going to be able to pay these student loans back with those skills that they're going to get from the degree. I don't think an engineer is going to be dissuaded from going to university when they have to pay higher prices. But I think that those who are taking soft skills, arts degrees, might think twice. And I'm saying this as someone who got an arts degree, but I knew why I wanted it and what I was going to use it for. Oh, also annoying. And the thing I'm going to also just mention here when it comes to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives is I do want them, now that the Liberals have said that they want immigration restrictions, I want Pierre Poilievre, Jamil Jivani, and because he's actually taking a lead on immigration, again, go sign his petition. It's in the description below. They need to start naming the number that they want. And I think they should say, we want 100,000. Around 100,000 a year for the next decade is how we stabilize things. We need to lower taxes, let people have their own families, not say like, oh my goodness, I can't believe people aren't having kids when they give half their income to the government every year. Goodness, just get out of people's way and they actually might be able to increase the population themselves. Oh, but I want to quickly jump on. This is a wacky video I want to show you from Sean Fraser, the man who used to be the immigration minister before Mark Miller. His deputy minister said that immigration rates are too high for housing, and now he's going to try and shame the Conservatives on affordable housing.
When their leader was actually in the position of housing minister, he got only 6 affordable housing units built across the entire country. We're going to focus on what matters to Canadians, not the distractions that they try to put on the floor of the House of Commons.
195,000 was the number, and that's a number that minister would only dream of building.
6 is the number of affordable housing units that the government helped build. They're trying to take credit for the number of homes that Canadians build. But Mr. Speaker...
But that's what the current government's doing, Sean. This is a video he posted himself. The whole point is that the government gets to take credit for the behavior they enable when they're in government. So if you're a government that reduces crime because you had tougher on crime laws, it's not because you were jumping in front of bullets and stopping crimes as they were occurring. It's that you create an environment where less people commit crimes. If you create an environment where more housing is built, more affordable housing is built, that means that you get to take credit for that. The Liberals are trying to take credit for a plan that hasn't even worked yet, which is to build 4 million new homes. Did they actually say that they were going to build them themselves? Obviously not. They're going to try and incentivize house building so it would reach 4 million homes built by 2031 or whatever their number was. That's impossible. Their housing restrictions make it impossible to do, and their taxes make it impossible to do. But obviously, the Liberals understand this. Yes, the federal government, when Poilievre was the housing minister, only specifically built six buildings that were government projects. Even then, I think that's not necessary. You could have probably just let a developer do it with a tax incentive, and that would have been fine enough. But that's the point. Sean Fraser has had housing builds go down every single year while he's pretending that he is the one in control of the housing market. And by his own logic, he's been failing because house building has been going down over time. Absolutely nuts. Anyways, this is the stuff that drives me up the wall here. I think there's one more clip related to immigration going on that I wanted to talk about. Oh yes, here is this Mark Miller thing right here. They start asking him about, on the day of the immigration announcement, what he thinks about Justin Trudeau staying on as the Liberal leader.
Before we're done, Minister, I do have to ask the question because we can't ignore the fact that at the end of your news conference today, the questions asked of the Prime Minister were about his future as Liberal leader, not so much about your policy change, which makes me wonder, is Mr. Trudeau's leadership now a distraction for your government?
I think it's a distraction to who we need to be focusing on, which is Pierre Poilievre and the current iteration of the Conservative Party, which is extremely toxic. And I think fundamentally,
you just endorsed the Conservatives' immigration philosophy of lowering it just today.
If elected, would be destructive to Canada. Canadians are starting to realize that he's not only an unqualified, unpleasant character, he's starting to roll out policies and points of views that we've seen him take in the past over the last 20 years of his incessant talking in the House of Commons about what he would do to this country. Canadians need to focus a little more intensely on that, and every minute spent on sort of this internal Liberal stuff is a minute that we're not spending focusing on the real threat that is Pierre Poilievre, and that's where
the real threat, which is Pierre Poilievre, who you've just taken part of his immigration policy from because he's toxic. And he's like, his incessant talking in Parliament the last 20 years. He's an MP. What was he paid to do, like paperwork in his office? Obviously not. He is paid to speak and represent his constituents. But I guess that's a tough concept for Mark Miller to understand. Anyways, so what I want from the Conservatives from here on out is that we need a very solid number of immigrants that we are saying that we want per year. I think temporary foreign workers should be reduced by like 80% or more. It's just not needed. And the thing is, I don't want to just lower it and then say, deal with it, business community. I want it lowered while we lower taxes. So I want taxes on the federal government level, income tax brackets, lowered by 3 to 5%. Corporate taxes need to be lowered by 3 to 5%. And we'd actually bring in more tax revenue if we did that. It's the classic Laffer curve scenario. We are at such a high fever pitch tax rate right now, tax burden, that we are bringing in less revenue because people are leaving the country or they're working less, they're retiring early, all that stuff. So that's what we need to do. We need to lower temporary foreign workers. We need to we don't even need to cap students. We just need to make it so that domestic students actually pay for more than 25% of their education. For domestic students pay nothing. I've paid for a degree where there was no tuition capping. It's not that difficult. I had to pay a lot of money per semester, more than I would even say that domestic students would have to pay for an undergrad, but it's possible. And the thing is, if it's a degree that's worth it to you, you do it happily. Anyways, so we need to lower taxes, put a heavy cap on temporary foreign workers, get rid of these wage subsidies for temporary foreign workers, and we need to reduce new permanent residents to around 100,000, 80 to 120,000 is a good year-to-year range, with a real values test, with a real test of the person's ability to be productive. And that's how we get things on the right track. And the Conservatives need to push a solid plan on those things, because I don't want them to just basically make sounds about the immigration system is broken. I like Pierre Poilievre. I thought actually his response to Mark Miller and Trudeau's announcement wasn't quite right, because he talked about how they broke the immigration system, which is true when it comes to them letting ISIS terrorists across the border and all this other stuff. hurt the country. But I think that we need a solid number to then pressure the Liberals towards, if not achieve once they're in government. Okay. That's it for me today, guys. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment. I try and scroll through them all and read them all. I always even go back multiple times to read new comments. And if you want to support the show, donate to the Give, Send, Go in the description of the video below. That's also where the petition is from Jamil Giovanni that you should all sign. And then the petition, and I will have the donation link also pinned at the top of the comments. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you later at another date about another issue.